flow from the gutters of New York.
For more than a year, a cold-blooded killer stalked the streets of New York.
I am a monster. I am the son of Sam.
Man started screaming, "Help me, God, help me."
Sam loves to drink blood.
The girl was covered with blood.
Go out and kill, commands Father Sam.
His prey were the young and vulnerable.
Behind our house, some rest. Mostly young, raped and slaughtered, their blood drained, just bones now.
In the next hour, new facts and new questions about the Son of Sam and the killing spree that terrified a city. It was the fall of 1976 in Queens, New York, a carefree time for 20-year-old Carl Denaro.
Girls, cars, sports, the Mets, the Jets.
In 5 days, he would be in the Air Force, and he was enjoying his final days at home.
Tie up loose ends and, sow some wild oats before I went into the service.
The last thing on Carl's mind was that anyone would want to kill him. October 23rd began as a typical Saturday.
Got up around 11 or 12, took a shower, played some basketball.
Carl and his friends were known as the Flushing Boys, named for their neighborhood in Queens.
I guess around 6 o'clock, a friend of mine, Timmy, came and picked me up, and we went to the bar.
The bar was full of friends who came to wish Carl good luck and farewell. One of them was Rosemary Keenan.
She was a lot of fun. She had big brown eyes. I remember that. We started fooling around. Next thing you know, we got into her car and drove to a darkened street in the neighborhood. We parked, and literally 2 minutes later, there was glass all over. I had glass shards in my hand. I didn't hear any gunshots. I didn't know I was shot. I knew I was hurt because I saw blood.
Rosemary was unharmed, but Carl had a .44 caliber bullet in the back of his head. His body went into shock. Only later, in the emergency room, would he begin to understand what had happened.
I can hear the doctors talking about bullet fragments and shrapnel and, glass. So at that point, I knew I was shot.
At the time, neither Carl nor police could see the connection to another attack 3 months earlier, just a few miles away in the Bronx. It was after 1 a.m. Mike Luria was about to take the family dog for a walk. His daughter, Donna, was talking to her friend Jody Valenti outside.
My wife comes screaming in the hall. It was shot. I ran down. By the time I got down, she was dead in the street.
Donna Luria died minutes after a bullet pierced her neck. She was just 18. Her friend Jody was badly wounded.
The chief suspect in that homicide, according to the Bronx homicide detectives, was her boyfriend, who was a low-level mafia numbers runner, and actually had a .44 caliber gun that he bought in Texas.
He was suspect number one, and they worked him and worked him and worked him.
Meanwhile, in Flushing, police were looking for someone in the neighborhood who hated Carl Denaro enough to kill him.
It was very nerve-wracking because I couldn't do anything. I was stuck in the house. I couldn't even go out to take a walk because the only thing separating the air and my brain was a flap of skin.
Eventually, Carl's head wounds would heal, but his carefree soul was scarred.
I'd sit by the window and look out, and look out at the traffic, and he'd start getting nervous, so I'd back away from the window.
1 month after Carl was shot, 2 teenagers, Joanne Lamino and Donna Damasi, were heading home from a movie. They would never make it through their front door. Soon, every time New Yorkers picked up a newspaper or turned on a television set, they would learn more about the killer in their neighborhoods.
There's not much crime here, especially violent crime. And this happened late at night, right at the steps of the Lamina household, just as the girls were about to go inside.
Girls are not familiar with the man. I heard Joanne, her friend, crying. So then me and my father got up and ran outside.
Did you see anybody out here at all?
No, I just heard the shots.
The girls lived, but Joanne was permanently paralyzed.
Things like this don't happen here. You read about them, you see it on television, but it doesn't happen on your block.
In 5 months, there had been 3 seemingly random shootings, all well after midnight. 1 girl was dead and 1 was paralyzed, but it was only the beginning. January 30th, 1977.
Christine Freund and her boyfriend, whose name was John Deal, had been out that night and went to a movie.
Afterwards, over wine, they talked about setting a wedding date and how many children they'd have.
And after they were done there, they walked down the street towards the car that they came in, and they were sliding on the ice and fooling around like young lovers would do.
Just after midnight, as they embraced in their car, the killer approached. Lieutenant Richard Conlon was coming in for his first night shift at the precinct.
I was told that a young person was shot at up near the Forest Hills station.
John Deal escaped unharmed, but Christine Freund was hit twice in the head. She died within hours. 5 weeks later, and just 150 feet away, another attack on a college student left police dumbfounded.
Here's a young girl coming home from Columbia University, and out of nowhere comes this moron with a gun and puts it in her face and blows her head off.
The gunman had hidden his weapon in a plastic bag.
She wouldn't have seen it until he was right on top of her.
She had probably a sense of what was going to happen to her because she had pulled her books up in front of her face.
You see the school books with a bullet hole in the middle of it, and you see the girl's face blowing off. It affected me in such a way that I went home that night and cried my eyes out.
Police had been searching for a pattern to the murders, but this latest attack was very different.
We were looking for somebody who operates 12 to 8. It just blew our minds because this happened at 7:30 at night.
Anyone seen in the area at the time? Have you been able to make any connections here at all?
We have one person running from the scene described to us as a young teenager.
There has been some speculation tying this sort of a shooting, this sort of a killing with that of Miss Freund, January 30th.
At this point in our investigation, we have no reason to believe that the cases are connected. The ballistic evidence that has not been available to us at this time, I have no report at all on that.
One of the problems you have with firearms identification, identifying bullets, is that some of them are too deformed for identification. The lead gets deformed when it hits the body, hits something else, so that you cannot make the comparison.
But evidence sometimes hides where you least expect it. The night Carl DeNaro was shot, he was with Rosemary Keenan in her Volkswagen.
She was cleaning the car out. She had an old plaid blanket, and when she pulled it out, a bullet fell out.
I get a beep to call the ballistics lab, and I call Detective Simmons, and he informs me, Joe, we have a match. When I brought that back to my bosses and said that the ballistics guy and I believe that we have a serial killer here, they went nuts. They said, what are you trying to do, panic the city?
Next, the killer taunts police.
Let me haunt you with these words. I'll be back. I'll be back, to be interpreted as...
By March of 1977, New York police were investigating 5 shootings with no apparent motives. 3 young people were dead and 4 others seriously injured. The most recent case of Virginia Voskerichian was the most perplexing. Virginia was a top student. She had no boyfriend, no enemies. Her execution-style killing would put police on the trail of the killer and the murder weapon.
We know from ballistics studies that the bullet fired out of a particular gun has very, very unique markings.
The bullet from the Voskorician case matched the one that killed Donna Loria.
It came from a Charter Arms Bulldog gun, 44 caliber. The particular gun involved was designed for sky marshals.
3 stolen airplanes and nearly 300 hostages.
During the 70s, there was a rash of airplane hijackings, and air marshals were put on flights all over the world. But they had to come up with a weapon that they could fire inside of an airplane and not cause the plane to go down.
Detectives began a nationwide search for Charter Arms Bulldog guns.
We checked them nationwide. We went through printout after printout after printout of all the Charter Arms Bulldogs. We checked every one of them that we could find.
They found thousands of Bulldogs across the country. Someone in New York had one and was using it regularly. The killer had attacked in 2 New York boroughs, the Bronx and Queens. Police investigated the survivors of the attacks for any hint of a pattern. Joanne Lamino was shot in the spine and was paralyzed from the waist down. Donna DeMasi and Jody Valenti would recover from their injuries. Carl Denaro would also recover after a metal plate was installed to replace his shattered skull. All the victims were very young, and all except Carl were women.
Carl had long hair and he was in the passenger seat. Rosemary had short hair and she was in the driver's seat.
Was it possible that the shooter mistook Carl for a woman? The day after the killing of Virginia Voskorician, police announced the creation of an expanded task force. 30 detectives were assigned. Half the officers would follow up with victims' families. The other half would work the field.
We're dealing with a serial killer, apparently with no known motive, killing innocent young people.
We'd have to get him before the act. We'd have to get him in an act.
So we come up with some schemes. We got some mannequins and we dressed them up as women, and we would sit in the car with them as lovers.
The killer would always strike near an expressway where he could escape quickly.
We knew we had 5 separate shootings, and we had to try to put them all together.
The witnesses that survived gave us sketches, and each sketch was different than the other sketch. When you're the witness of a violent crime that you're directly involved in, and you see a man come up, or anybody come up with a gun and start shooting, the only thing that stays in your mind is the flash of that gun. You don't really see your face.
Still, police did their best to create a physical profile. A white male, 25 to 30 years old, 6 feet tall, medium build, with dark hair, known to police and the press as the 44 caliber killer.
There are some people that are quite good in remembering faces and what people are wearing, but when you have so many shootings and eyewitnesses giving their version of who they saw leaving the scene, you're going to get a lot of variation there. So I would consider that type of evidence generally unreliable.
Police remained on high alert, scouring all the boroughs. Still, the killer moved among them as if invisible. Valentina Suriani and Alexander Esau had spent the evening in Times Square, dinner and a movie. As the young couple returned home at 3 a.m., detectives who were watching the area ended their shift. Then, the killer moved in. Valentina Suriani died from 2 .44 caliber bullets to her head.
And she had a bracelet on her left wrist that was given to her by her father, and the morgue attendant was looking to cut it off with a huge pair of scissors.
Detective Joe Coffey had a daughter nearly the same age.
So I went over and pushed him out of the way, and I took the bracelet off the way it was supposed to be taken off, and I returned it to her father.
The mystery gunman took 2 lives that night and was literally taunting police.
At the scene of the double homicide up in the Bronx, Suriani and Isu, he left a letter addressed to me.
Motorcycle police had been the first to arrive at the scene.
And they got there, and they're not familiar with homicide investigations. And they found the envelope with the letter in it. And of course, they all touched it, so we had to go through a whole process of elimination prints.
And so, unfortunately, with too many people handling this document, latent prints could have become smudged or could have been ruined.
But New York's forensic team went to work.
2 pages, 5-hole loose leaf. We were able to determine that it was from a tablet. It was in pencil, and it was processed for latent fingerprints.
So we had to print every uniform cop that was on the scene so we can eliminate their prints to get to the prints that were unknown, hopefully the perpetrator.
After hundreds of hours of painstaking work, forensic scientists find themselves face to face with the palm print of the killer.
I am deeply hurt by your calling me a women hater. I am not, but I am a monster. I am the son of Sam.
Coming up next, police suspect one of their own, and a well-known columnist emerges in the very center of the investigation. Summer was approaching in New York, and the tension was rising quickly. The .44 caliber killer had now claimed 5 young lives. 4 others lived to tell about the terror.
Out in the night, empty neighborhoods of the city was a guy with frenzy in his eyes and a .44 bulldog in his hand.
Oh, scared. People were scared to death.
As each shooting happened, the terror in the city kind of was ramped up.
We used to stay in front of my house and park, and kiss goodnight, but we can't do that no more. Just go right in.
When I'm looking over my shoulder in the car, just, take no chances.
He shoots at young girls with brown hair.
Beauty parlors, they told me they were swamp women bleaching their hair blonde and cutting it short.
He shot 2 of the girls within 6 blocks of my house, and the streets where I live are totally deserted at dusk. I know one girl who now wears a blonde wig over her brown hair.
The publicity was unbelievable. Every time you turned the television on or radio or picked up a newspaper, that was the headline.
Yeah.
The police task force grew to 300. It still wasn't enough. 5,000 calls would tie up the phone lines every day.
But we had all kinds of people coming in. If they didn't like a neighbor, they called his name in, and somebody investigated.
People turned in by their girlfriends, their wives, or their parents as possible killers.
We interviewed over 15,000 people. It's unbelievable.
Police were desperate to stop the killer by any means necessary.
In my mind and in the minds of the people that I work with, we wanted to take him out and kill him. Did we discuss it among ourselves? Yes. Was it department policy? No.
Adding to the stress level, new evidence was pointing to an inside job.
We were getting indications from all over the place that this was somebody in law enforcement because of the description of the killer.
He would take a stance that was taught to us at the police range, where you would squat and put the gun straight out in front of you.
Just when every tip seemed to lead down a blind alley, a bizarre clue surfaced. Jimmy Breslin's secretary had opened a letter from the killer.
Called me up and she said, I have a letter here, I don't like it, it's creepy. Obviously, it was a demented mind hurling out words like sparks from a fire. And it wasn't rational writing at all. It came from the soul of schizophrenia.
Hello from the gutters of New York, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood. Hello from the sewers of New York, which swallow up the delicacies when they are washed away by the sweeper trucks. Perhaps we shall meet face to face someday. Or perhaps I will be blown away by cops with smoking 38s.
He signed it Son of Sam.
But once he got a letter, he became part of the investigation.
The ominous writing hinted at more killings, especially as the one-year anniversary of the crime spree approached.
Tell me, Jim, what will you have for July 29th? You can forget about me if you like, because I don't care for publicity. However, you must not forget Donna Loria, and you cannot let the people forget her either. She was a very, very sweet girl.
The killer seemed to have a special attachment to his first victim, Donna Loria, an 18-year-old medical technician who died at the scene of the crime. With 2 recent murders blocks away from Jimmy Breslin's home, the news columnist worried about his wife and daughter.
I had to move the family out for quite a while, so the house was empty, just me and the burglar alarm.
Under the headline, "Give Up Now," Jimmy Breslin wrote,
The only way for the killer to leave this special torment is to give himself up to me.
One weekend night in late June, Judy Placido and her friend Sal Lupo sat talking outside one of the most popular discos in Queens.
This Son of Sam, the way he comes out of nowhere, it's so scary. You never know, where he'll
Yeah,
hit next.
there's nobody. Nobody's out tonight. They're scared.
Yeah, but what are you supposed to do? Stay home forever?
As Judy spoke, she heard an echoing in the car and a ringing in her ears. Then she became disoriented and dazed. When she looked at herself in the rearview mirror, she was covered in blood.
In this particular case, he killed no one. But after he shot into the car, he walked back to his car. 2 detectives stopped him. While they were talking to him, he had the .44 caliber Charter Arms Bulldog gun in the brown paper bag. Over the radio comes shots fired, 211th Street and Northern Boulevard. Blocks away, the detectives didn't realize they had the guy who did the shooting. They dropped him, jumped in their car, and went to the scene. He got in his car and left.
The killer escaped. Judy Placido was hit by 3 bullets. One was near her temple, another by her spine. Miraculously, she lived. Sal Lupo was shot in the forearm. As the one-year anniversary approached, New Yorkers were more on edge than ever.
But the 31st, we have the plans in effect to shut down all the bridges. We have everything on a go basis. We're saturated, we have people, we have detectives, we bring them in from all over, because we know he's going to hit that weekend.
The police dragnet throughout Queens and the Bronx was impenetrable. Stacy Moskowitz spent most of the day getting ready for her first date with Bobby Violante. With her dyed blonde hair, she wasn't worried about the Son of Sam, and she planned to party in the safety of Brooklyn. The killer had never ventured there. Stacy had a great feeling about this date with Bobby Violante. After a movie, they drove towards a lover's lane near the water. Before they arrived, a Corvette was parked under a street lamp. Inside, Tommy Zano was trying to make out with his date, Debbie Krishenko. Debbie complained about the bright street lamp above, so Tommy scooted his car forward. What they didn't see is that just before they moved, the Son of Sam had them in his sights, ready to strike. When they started the car, he panicked. Moments later, Bobby and Stacy arrived.
It was late at night. They were coming home. They stopped at the park. They were on the swings.
The Son of Sam had now shifted his attention to Stacy and Bobby.
He went into the park where he found these 2 people playfully swinging on the swings. Violante said he noticed somebody by a tree, and that's what scared them to go back to their car.
There were no units in Brooklyn that night. The killer had never struck there. Now, the whole city felt vulnerable.
We knew it was shots. It had to be. And I said to my girlfriend, those were shots. And then this horn started beeping incessantly. And then it stopped, and then it beeped again. And then this man started screaming, help me, God help me.
All of a sudden over the air comes, Joe, this is probably nothing, but we got a shooting in Brooklyn. go take a look at it.
And then my girlfriends and I, instead of being sensible, we ran down the steps and out in front of the house. And we saw this one cop car pull up, and we ran down the street, and the guy was against the fence, slouched. And he was covered with blood, and the girl was covered with blood. It was a horror.
I knew that this was our guy. I knew that we had driven him from where we could localize him in the Bronx and Queens into a whole different area 10 miles away, and it was kind of devastating.
The couple was rushed to the hospital. Bobby was almost completely blinded by the bullets that ripped through his head. Stacy was far worse.
The fractures and injuries of the back of the brain are very serious injuries. I can tell you that the statistics are not very good.
In the past year, the Son of Sam had attacked 8 times. 5 of his victims were dead, and 1 was clinging to life.
All the technology in the world is not going to help you catch this guy. What helps you catch this guy is his ego and his taunting and his wanting to be splashed all over the headlines.
After months of stalking an invisible killer, police were about to get a break.
We were getting close.
August 2nd was a dark afternoon in New York. Stacy Moskowitz died at Kings County Hospital after a 38-hour vigil by her parents. She was 20 years old. The 6th victim to die in the year-long killing spree.
There was great sadness with that girl. They're all lovely young women, and then all of a sudden they're dead by some ogre out of the black of the night.
But this time, someone saw the ogre in the night. Tommy Zano was parked directly in front of Bobby and Stacy's car. He had seen the killer in his rearview mirror. He described a tall, thin man who wore a long gray shirt untucked and his sleeves rolled up.
He looked like he was in good shape, because after he fired the shots, he took right off it back into the park fast.
The new face of the killer, a long, thin profile with stringy, messy blonde hair. Several witnesses had seen a yellow Volkswagen driving away from the scene. But 2 blocks away, another witness reported a suspicious man near a sedan.
One woman told the detectives that a car had been given a parking ticket for parking next to a hydrant.
Cecilia Davis was out that night walking her dog.
I seen the police officer giving tickets out.
Miss Davis watched as the man hurried to his car, a Ford Galaxy.
I seen him taking off the ticket. He was still watching the police officers giving the rest of the cars tickets, and he followed the police officer.
The man Miss Davis saw was blocks away from the crime scene at the time of the shooting. Still, police thought he might have seen something.
We come up with a car that turned out to be a car from Yonkers, New York, David Berkowitz.
There was no answer at Berkowitz's home, so they tried the Yonkers police.
Police headquarters 82.
I'm trying to contact a Mr. David Berkowitz.
Is he at 35 Pine Street?
Do you know him?
This is the guy that I think is responsible. My father was down there Saturday.
The Yonkers police operator was Wheat Carr. Her father, Sam, had just made a complaint to police.
Sam Carr was in the 109 precinct talking to us about this neighbor who shot his dog, David Berkowitz.
Berkowitz, she said, had also written threatening letters to her father. Not realizing that they had stumbled upon the killer, Brooklyn police dispatched only a couple of detectives up to David Berkowitz's residence in Yonkers.
They get up there, and they're sitting there watching the vehicle.
They saw a duffel bag in the back seat with a gun barrel sticking out of it.
And one of the detectives breaks into the car without a warrant and finds the machine gun in the back seat.
A letter detailing plans to open fire on a Southampton discotheque was found in the glove compartment.
He comes out of the car, locks the car back up again, tells the detective sitting there he's going to get a search warrant from the Yonkers PD. Berkowitz comes walking out of his building, and the 2 detectives that were left there see him coming out and getting into this car holding a brown paper bag. And he said, put your hands on the dashboard and don't move. Berkowitz turns to him and goes, you got me. Polatico says, who do I have? He says, you got the Son of Sam. And sitting in the car next to him in a brown paper bag was the .44 caliber weapon that killed and shot all these people. That was it.
He didn't resist in any way, and he was philosophic about it.
Chief Keenan, what resemblance did he bear to this latest sketch that you released?
He looked more like the first sketch.
Choke to the lions!
We capture him on August 10th, 1977. For 1 week solid. Any restaurant we went into, any bar we went into, we would get standing ovations, because they all knew us from the publicity. You couldn't buy a drink. You couldn't pay for your own meals. Girls were coming up and throwing their arms around you, kissing you. My wife didn't like that too much.
There was a submachine gun with several clips of ammunition and a loaded .44 Bulldog revolver.
The .44 Bulldog?
Well, we're checking that out, and we anticipate the results will be positive.
They held the biggest promotion ceremony in the history of the NYPD before the ink was dried on Berkowitz's fingerprints.
It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I got a phone call from a reporter. I hear this guy saying they caught the Son of Sam. And I just remember sitting on the side of my bed for about 2 hours, just 10 months of worrying and questioning, you know, why, who. It kind of all came together in that one phone call.
For David Berkowitz, the questions were just beginning.
My first question when I walked into the room, he was sitting there staring at me, smiling, and I just said, why? And he said, because I had the urge, and I had the urge to kill, and I had to do it.
My ego was deflated when I saw David Berkowitz sitting in that office. He looked like a little tub of butter.
And they'd come out holding their hands up. He talks about a 2,000-year-old dog. What can you do with him? It was just another lone, demented person running around shooting people with a gun, a serial killer.
David Berkowitz was a 24-year-old postal worker. He lived by himself in Yonkers. The Sam in the Son of Sam letters referred to his neighbor Sam Carr, the same Sam Carr who had gone to police to report Berkowitz for shooting at his dog. Berkowitz told detectives that his neighbor's black Labrador was possessed by ancient demons, and the dog would beam out commands for him to kill and kill again. Tormented, he had tried to kill the dog, but it was futile. The demons simply grew stronger and more demanding.
You got into Berkowitz's apartment, and you were, I guess the word would be shocked.
Covering the walls of the apartment, detectives saw the writings of a deranged tenant, someone who appeared to have lost touch with reality. Experts concluded Berkowitz was fit to stand trial, though one of the doctors doubted his story altogether.
The demons he first described have disappeared. I became very suspicious of him.
Reporters were suspicious too. This short young man with the slow walk and pleasant smile didn't seem capable of pulling off the Son of Sam killings.
Is it unfair to observe that both the police department and the mayor were under a huge amount of public pressure to get somebody?
If you're implying a political pressure, that's ridiculous. Something had to be done. We were doing everything we could to make the arrest in order to relieve the tension not only on the police themselves, but to relieve the fear and the tension in the city.
Emotions ran high in New York as the trial began.
Murderers like this definitely have to be put away in electric chair or shot or any other way there is.
I still want my eye for an eye and tooth for two. Yep. I want him dead. Dead. I want him dead, dead, dead.
David Berkowitz, the suspected Son of Sam, who arrived in an olive police van for arraignment in Brooklyn.
David Berkowitz then stood up and pled guilty to all the murders.
The judge sentenced him, and made sure writing on a sentence said that the guy should never be released. That was it. Bang, adjourned, take him away, and he's gone.
The judge sentenced him to 6 consecutive life terms, 365 years in prison. But years later, many of those closest to the crimes are convinced Berkowitz did not act alone.
There is a cult involved in this. And that's why I say he's not alone.
He was a As David Berkowitz entered prison to serve 6 consecutive life sentences, he left behind a twisted trail of contradictions. Throughout the investigation, Tommy Zano was the best witness police had found. Parked directly in front of Stacy and Bobby's car, Tommy watched the gunman in his rearview mirror.
He looked like he was in good shape, because after he fired the shots, he took right off it back into the park fast. A week later, we seen David Berkowitz, and what he looked like, I don't think he was physically capable of doing that.
Eyewitnesses at the Stacy Moskowitz shooting scene described somebody with long hair, tall, lanky. I think we can all agree that Berkowitz is not tall and lanky. He never was and never will be.
David Berkowitz is stocky, 5 feet 8 inches tall, 180 pounds. He confessed that he was at the Moskowitz crime scene.
It's just a question of who actually pulled the trigger. I don't think it was David Berkowitz.
Cecilia Davis saw Berkowitz near her house that night, 2 blocks from the murder scene.
He came up towards me, and right here by that exit over there, entrance, whatever you would call it, he looked me straight in my face.
Her description matches David Berkowitz. He was wearing a denim jacket, blue jeans, and a polo shirt. So, were there 2 gunmen at the Brooklyn shooting? Were others involved in the murder spree? These are the questions Carl Denaro, a survivor of one Son of Sam attack, has been researching for 15 years.
I started finding some things that just didn't jive with the story, with the official story.
The parents of other victims have their doubts too.
In my opinion, the New York Police Department covered it up.
There's not one shred of evidence, none, that Berkowitz acted alone. But there's a room full of evidence, circumstantial, strong information that says he didn't.
Investigative journalist Maury Terry has met with David Berkowitz dozens of times and learned about his membership in a satanic cult.
There's this force that kind of seems to draw you into this, where, you know, you're just taking one step at a time, and it's like, I guess, you're stuck in the tide, you know, the tide carries you out, and before you know it, you're so far out from shore that it's hard to get back.
David Berkowitz said he joined the cult in this abandoned building at a park in Yonkers, New York. Yonkers police confirmed that there was satanic cult activity in the area.
People, when they get into the occult, they don't understand really everything that they're really getting into. There's a price to pay.
And it is here Berkowitz told Maury Terry that the cult planned the Son of Sam killings to create chaos in New York and satisfy the perverse cravings of cult members.
I never knew, I never thought that the day would come when we would start to kill people.
Hello from the gutters of New York.
Words in one Son of Sam letter referred to the location of the cult ritual headquarters, directly above an aqueduct that flows into New York.
I mean, nobody's saying David Berkowitz is an innocent guy. He admits he killed 3 people, and he was an active accomplice to the rest of it.
I was at all of them. I did not pull the trigger at every single one of them.
On the night Virginia Vascarician was killed, an eyewitness saw a teenager running from the scene.
The sketch of ski cap came from a witness. The person in the ski cap, the shooter, ran right by him.
Another witness reported that after Christine Freund was killed, the gunman had a getaway car and a driver.
She heard the shots, looked out the window, saw a guy hop into a red car and take off.
If you look at the pictures that the NYPD put out, they're just, you know, right there it tells you there's other people involved. You can do a lot of things to change your appearance, but you can't go from a chubby fat guy to somebody with a long, sunken cheeks and a long chin.
But the biggest contradiction to the official story boils down to simple geography. On the night Stacy Moskowitz was shot, Miss Cecilia Davis saw David Berkowitz on Bay 17th Street.
And he walks right by her. And he gives her a look, she gives him a look, and he turns to walk into the courtyard. And she hurries back to her apartment, takes the leash off the dog, sits down, opens the newspaper, and hears the shots.
The murder happened more than 2 blocks away on Shore Parkway.
And it's physically impossible for Berkowitz to get to the shooting scene in a minute and a half. It's physically impossible.
Berkowitz would have had to walk 2 blocks, change his clothes, put on a blonde wig, watch Stacy for 10 seconds, and fire, all in about a minute and a half.
That's been timed 10 times by me. He couldn't have made it.
In the mid-1990s, Yonkers police detective Kevin Murphy found other evidence of a conspiracy. Through witnesses and receipts, he confirmed that Berkowitz's apartment was cleared of furniture shortly before police arrived.
Majority of the furniture, they moved out and they moved to a location.
All the stuff on the walls, put there recently, within the last week. Stuff in his notebook, phone book, put there recently.
Maury Terry says it was to make Berkowitz fit the profile of a crazed, reclusive serial killer. But neighbors paint a different picture. They saw Berkowitz visiting this house often, the home of Sam Carr and his black Labrador. Daughter Wheat had taken the phone call that led detectives to Berkowitz. David also knew the sons of Sam, Michael and John, who allegedly belonged to the same satanic cult. In one of his letters, Berkowitz referred to another cult member as John Wheaties. That was the nickname of John Carr.
John Carr was found lying with his head half blown off on the floor of his girlfriend's apartment. And just as the case started to be reopened, Michael Carr goes off the West Side Highway at 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was. And he's dead.
The district attorney from Queens, where most of the shootings occurred, was convinced that Berkowitz was part of a conspiracy.
I believe that David Berkowitz did not act alone, that in fact others did cooperate, aid, and abet him in the commission of these crimes.
He was unable, however, to find support for a new investigation. The notion of a cult orchestrating the Son of Sam murders may seem far-fetched, but for those closest to the killings, there's too much evidence to ignore.
I always felt right from the beginning that there was more to it.
There is a cult involved in this. And that's why I say he's not alone. He wasn't alone. I think he's afraid of opening his mouth.
There was no way it could have been a lone gunman.
I'm 100% convinced that more than one shooter was involved in the Son of Sam shootings.
If there were others, they're walking around scot-free. And I think everybody would like those kinds of people brought to justice.
David Berkowitz received 56 stitches from an attempt on his life in 1979. But today, he is a born-again Christian, and prison staff says he's a model prisoner. He claims he has rejected the satanic cult he once belonged to, but cautions that fellow cult members are still out there.
They're definitely dangerous. It's my hunch that they've become more sophisticated, more covert. They have their own hideaways now. They probably have their own funeral homes for ritual purposes and dispose of bodies and so forth. Once they find out that law enforcement people are maybe zeroing in on anything that they're doing, whatever it is, they have a way of just vanishing.
He is one of the most decorated